Hi, welcome back for another episode of Let's Talk About It. I've got a very exciting, cool episode for you today because I've got a very exciting, cool guest for you. Francis Odum is a cybersecurity researcher and independent analyst. He's also the founder of Software Analyst Cybersecurity Research Substack. Say that 5 times fast. And he's the author behind many reports like Securing the Identity Attack Surface, The Future of Cloud Native Security, The Growing Impact of Non-Human Identities, and many, many more. Today, though, he is here to talk about one of his more recently published reports, which is titled Revolutionizing Security Operations, The Path Towards an AI Augmented SOC. So, without further ado, let's get into the episode. I'm joined with Francis Odum today. Welcome to the podcast, Francis. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
What I would like to discuss with you is the concept of AI in SOC, and whatever we're going to call that, autonomous SOC, AI in the SOC, AI augmented SOC. Actually, let's start with that. What do you think is the right terminology for this?
I love that. I mean, look, I've been going back and forth. I've even done some advisory work, just going back and forth on all types of definitions, right? Some people are calling AI assisted SOC, AI SOC, autonomous SOC, AI augmented SOC,
Yeah, like I'm
autonomous
confused now.
agentic SOC. Like you could go on and on and on and on. And I think, quite frankly, that's the state of where we're at today. I mean, that's the state of where we're at. Like we're still really coming to terms. I don't think anyone has a standard industry. And even the likes of Gartners and the Foresters of the world, I don't think they've actually come to one particular terminology. But personally, I actually prefer, if you ask me my preference, it'd be more an AI augmented SOC. And I think in my reports, which some of your listeners could actually check out, I do have AI augmented SOC because I think it's an augmentation process. Meanwhile, there will be a time where, you know what, we should call this autonomous SOC, right? There will be a time or agentic SOC, if you want to call it. But right now, I think it's AI augmented SOC or AI assisted SOC, if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah.
But you know what? There's still no right word, man. Everyone is still going back and forth. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, okay. I do have like so many questions about that already, but let's go back maybe to the beginning then and talk about why we have this in place in the first place. And I think that it has to do with companies, maybe in like 2015, let's say, were selling people the dream of automating SOC, right? And however that worked at the time, there was no real AI in SOC at the time, but automating SOC. And what they were sold was that ability to do so. What the actuality of the situation was that it just was a lot of laborious effort, a lot of manual steps that needed to be done before they could actually automate anything. So it just didn't work for people. So can you speak a bit more about that process and why we're here today because of that?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I like I like how you really like give that time frame because the first type of ever introduction of automation or automating things or leveraging machines to even do something nearly that a human would do got quietly introduced from the likes of Phantom, which was acquired by Splunk. This was years ago, right? Decades ago now at this point. And quite frankly, companies were like, this was the first ever introduction of what automation could actually look like. And actually, the promise initially was, you know what, these new automation workflow tools are going to replace humans in the stuff.
Yeah, like we were
I think
already saying that ages
I
ago.
think it's actually yes. I think it's very important for people to actually realize that was the initial promise. That was initially the initial promise of I don't want to call out names of specific names. I know I just gave one, but yes, about 10 years ago, there were a number of these really early companies, quite frankly, that are now legacy at this point, who promised us that, hey, security orchestration, automation, and response tools, SOAR tools, we're going to automate repetitive tasks and they'll orchestrate all your responses. And guess what? You're going to save tons and tons of money. And this was the early promise. However, unfortunately, that didn't happen, right? I mean, we're still there like 10 years afterwards. We're still where we're at, you know? And I think um, It's a very, and I think this is also why security leaders, some that I've spoken to, are just like a little bit not skeptical. You could say, are asking questions of like this new promise of AI SOC coming to save us. Because for many of them, they just got in bond, they've got promised that this is what they were going to get, and it gave them another result. And I think many leaders are also asking that question today of like, is this stuff real? Because we've got in our hands bonds in the past, you know? So it's a very interesting question because I think in a nutshell, not to get into the details just yet, except you want me to, but in a brief, the evolution of automation and security operations started from the early days of the SOAR tools as we know it, with your workflow tools, that increasingly became really complex, really hard to integrate, really hard to put together. And we had this new evolution of new companies, quite frankly, like D3 and a number of other companies, quite frankly, that evolved to give us what we know as low code, no code type automation capabilities. So, which really meant evolving that complex process, making that a lot more easier, making that easy to build this workflow and playbooks and runbooks for a soft process, you know. And I think now we're at like this third generation, and I think some of your listeners have seen my reports. I break down this evolution in three major parts. And then now we're at this point whereby we have the ability to use AI to build upon what vendors like yourself have started off in the low code, no code, and help us evolve. And so we're at a really fascination point because there's been a build out to this moment.
Yeah, no, and I totally get the hesitation to adopt any kind of AI because we are using the same kind of terminology as people were using 10 years ago to be like, you're going to replace your AI agents or like you're going to replace your AI analyst or you're going to replace your SOC analyst with AI. And that's the same kind of verbiage that like people in this automation space have been saying for ages. So, of course, people are going to be hesitant to adopt this because let's be real, the low code automation uh, stage of things, it was still not perfect. You still needed a lot of manual effort to be able to actually make those playbooks to have the automation. But now we're kind of moving into a stage where we are going to have AI that's actually going to be creating the playbooks. So you can like, describe a situation and, use leverage your whole tech stack and then the playbook is made for you and then you can say like yes or no, this is what I want to run. That's going to save so much time. It's so interesting how that is going to work. And yeah, I don't know. What do you think about the adoption of these kinds of tools today because of this?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, definitely the way I kind of look at it in my research is right now there are roughly about two types of if you want to tell CISOs and SOC leaders in terms of their adoption stages. So you kind of have the early adopters, right? These are the early ones that are very open to risk, open to experimenting and trying this out and do see the promise. They do see the benefit, even though they know they've been burnt in the past, but they're like, you know what, we've seen the power of AI and what's possible with LLMs, and now we can actually use this to improve our process. And so you do have a handful, a third, if you want to call them, of early adopters who are trying out and experimenting with these technologies. Obviously, I don't think we're at wide scale adoption just quite yet. We're still really far from that. But you still have companies say, hey, you know what? We're actually going to bring you in for a small number of use cases, and let's see how well you could actually help us triage these cases.
Yeah.
You also have another set of CISOs and SOC leaders that I've interacted with who are just like, this is still too far away for us. So like, they were like, these are the ones that like they maybe have some automation to in-house already, and they're just like, you know what, we're fine with that for now. Like, we want to wait to see how this technology evolves, flush out, want to understand the accuracy levels of things. And so you still have a little bit of that hesitancy. And I think you maybe might have a few who are kind of in the middle, you kind of have a third
Yeah.
of each. So I don't think we have good data just quite yet as of 2025, but I think a lot of the analysts and CISO surveys that I've seen in terms of CISO budgeting and like spending intentions for 25, AI SOC is definitely on that list of like area where they're like, hey, look, we want to try this. We want to see how this is going to help us. But the
Yeah.
reality is, yes, you have both people on the aisle.
Both view that. And then you have people on the very extreme side, like a lot of people who are in maybe more heavily regulated industries, government, healthcare, whatever, that are just like zero AI. Not
2026,
happening.
that's what they tell you. Yeah, exactly. 2026, 27 timeline agenda. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And yeah, I do think it's because of all of this stuff that people have had to deal with when implementing automation. It's just like a lot of big promises and a lot of under delivering. So it'll be really interesting to see how the AI agentic part actually plays out and gets adopted. Um, what so given that that's where we're at today, when do you think AI adoption for in the SOC will increase more so, I guess, for like creating playbooks? Because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the AI that's in the SOC already today is not necessarily AI creating playbooks. It's like AI case summaries and other like AI enrichment maybe, but not playbook generation. So where do you think it's at today?
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think this is also something that gets sometimes gets lost on the market. Is there's a difference between automation, just basic automation and workflow type tools, and relative to what we talk about with AI SOC capabilities and that intelligent layer that we talk about. And they're kind of different. You know, some people kind of like, oh yeah, they're all kind of the same. Yeah, we're just talking about automation and whatnot. And I think it's important that on the automation side, a number of what vendors like obviously D3 and a number of other players on the market today quite help companies with, or at least started from to where we're at now, is how you help companies with really making this playbooks, creating workflows, right? In which you want things to be automated, whether it's for your IT team, even sometimes they might not even be security use cases, they might be HR use, they might be finance use cases. But how do you set up a whole playbook on how you actually want to manage things or resolve alerts or cases that come from your SIM today, right? Your SIM flag alerts, and you need to be able to sometimes enrich those and then automate and close the ticket, or you need to be able to put into a case for an analyst to actually look over. And so those are core automation type capabilities. But now, when we talk about AI and the power that AI actually does have, I mean, obviously, you brought up one of the case studies being the fact that we have the capability of just writing a prompt to actually say, hey, we want a workflow being created for us very easily. So that's definitely one. But more importantly, is just the intelligence we have now that's been incorporated with the likes of AI. So again, all of this obviously came about with the evolution of new types of LLMs that we have. And where the power comes now is we have an agent or AI that's actually able to read context of thousands of data points and information and ingest unlimited amounts of data and make a new intelligent decision, right? It's able to think or act like how a human would be, or tier one might actually close a case or triage or close out a false positive case. And I think there's a big difference in terms of both technology. And I think where the future, though, when I think about even what a automation type um, platform looks like. I think you need to have the automation piece and you need to have the AI capability, and you need to be able to bring both together to create a platform within the SOC.
Yeah,
In
for
terms
sure.
of adoption, I think we've seen a good amount of adoption on the automation side, right? On the low code, no code
Yeah.
playbooks, workflows. And I think we're a lot of companies, and we still need that market is still big. There's still huge opportunities because we know what's happened with the legacy solutions. I think there's a lot of like rip and replace opportunities. There's still opportunity for net new case studies because also too, I think a lot of the things the AI SOC can do is like help you automate like an IT workflow or like do some HR automation type workflows. I think those things are harder. Where you have the power of AI actually now working, in terms of adoption of actually AI in the SOC, I mean, I do think this year, particularly, from at least my research and the work software analyst does, is many CISOs have actually put 2025 as a year of experimenting these technologies. Like they want to put this AI SOC tools alongside the tier one analysts, the SOC analysts, and actually say, hey, is this actually detecting the types of alerts that is this actually closing? Is this flagging the types of things we would regard as a high priority or true positive that needs further enrichment or further analysis? And so I think this is the year where companies are experimenting. And I do think by 2026, and I do think you're actually going to see lots of companies. I mean, I already gave a case study. I have some companies like one of the largest ride-hailing company actually leverages a huge part of AI SOC capabilities, right?
Mm,
From one of the vendors. within their SOC today, right? And so they've been able to reduce how many tier one analysts you have. So you don't get me wrong, you still have adoption that's even happening today, and that's just one company. I do know a few other cloud centric. It's also a lot of the companies that are like new cloud
Yeah.
centric.
Okay, wait, hold on though. You said
Okay,
that this company is replacing their tier one SOC analysts with AI.
not replacing all, not all, but a good chunk of their team now.
Interesting. Okay. How common do you think that is?
As of today, this is a ride-hailing company. This is one of the popular ride-hailing companies in the world. And so obviously they were started what maybe 10, 15 years ago, right? And
Mm,
so what that means is they're fairly early adopter, right? They're not, you remember I gave that two framework of two types of adopters today.
yeah.
They were not early because they're more risk-taking and whatnot. Obviously, if you're talking about a large bank or a financial institution, I mean, look, I don't have all the data on the market. This is just the research that I've done my industry work. There could be some, but yes, that's that case study that I gave you. They were able to talk about just even how many alerts they're closing with the capabilities of AI already. Again, they haven't adopted it across their whole stock because one of the largest, they're $1 billion company, so it's a large, complex organization. They're like, hey, we're actually just going to use the AI stuff to help us triage maybe EDR type or telemetry type data sets and for this small case study. So that's kind of the adoption we're seeing now. And then
Right.
they're like, okay, you know what? It's actually done pretty well. Let's now expand it to like look at more IP addresses and like let's enlarge the case studies. But they've seen some good results. They've seen mean time to detect go faster, and gradually that also will help your mean time to respond get better and your incident response. But right now it's a lot more on the basic case studies. And so, but that's kind of what we're seeing is so it's the forward companies are trying this, they're experimenting it,
Right.
they're the ones rootless around how we want to really get efficient and productive in our teams, and they're using it. And I do think more larger scale though, it will take some time, probably back half of the year, as more success stories like this come out, right? I think
Right.
it takes more success studies like this, and another CISO looks and like, oh wow, those guys are seeing this. So like, okay, now we
Yeah.
actually adopt this as well. So
Oh, okay. This is so interesting because I think like a lot of people are scared of this, of AI replacing them as analysts. And so, what do you think the future of the tier one analyst will be?
yeah, I mean, if we think about it today, the tier one, let's just before we go into like what that future could look like. I mean, if we look at it today, like historically what it's always been, it has been a big part of what a tier one analyst does is quite frankly, they're looking at this really low risk alerts, right?
Low
They're
risk,
you
big burnout, like just a lot of work, a lot of effort.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. I mean, and they're always never like I've spoken to these guys, and what they tell me is like we're never actually able to get all of the alerts. Like it's just like
oh,
they
for
get because they
sure.
get hundreds a day, depending on the skill of the organization, and they're just like you know what, we're just gonna do whatever we do, and then we pray for the rest that like we hope like nothing severe actually comes in, and so but there's always something at the back of your mind that feels like, oh man, I haven't resolved everything. I only got you like 20 out of 100 today. Like, but I'm hoping like the other 99 or 88 something down there
Just
isn't going
fingers
to be what
crossed.
it's like fingers crossed, right? And so it's a lot of low fidelity type data. They're looking up IP addresses and maybe like doing a lot of enrichment. So looking up like a virus total, or putting an IP address is suspicious. So they're looking at alerts. They're doing a lot of work around just enrichment work. They're doing some basic report writing is a big one, like just in terms of like actually just putting together reports of like specific maybe low fidelity things that happen. And then a lot of times escalating things to the other teams. So like for more advanced trend hunting or things that require more investigation, they're escalating it to like a tier two or a level
Hmm.
three type analyst. So in a nutshell, alert prioritization, reporting case studies, enrichment, and context work, that's what they spend a lot of their time, and they're not able to get through all of that. Now
Hmm.
you give them the power of an AI SOC or an AI augmented SOC, quite frankly, that's actually able to help them. And some of the results you do find, quite frankly, are one, a lot of these alerts, you're getting hundreds of alerts a day. Now, if you actually do have an AI now that's well trained and you bring them into your environment, what does that does? It takes that down to about, let's say, 40, right? So like it clears out the alerts that you're not meant to look at and just reduces that whole manual triage, gives you the most important things that you actually should be looking at, right? And I think that's what we're seeing. So cutting down on alert fatigue, low priority events, and make you spend time on more important things.
Right.
And then the result of that then is you then see a faster time to respond, like an MTTR, right? In terms of reducing your incident response times, right? You're also cutting down on just the number of time for reporting. So we know writing cases is like a very common thing, right? You could now, this is a big one. AI case summaries is a big productivity hack because in the past you spent hours writing reports, but now with the power of AI, you could very easily just make that process in minutes or thereabouts, or with a couple of prompts. And lastly, I do think a big part of how this also helps teams today is more around the enrichment work, right? So you spend a lot of time connecting, like looking at virus total, reversing loss, some of these other like IP things, threat intel databases, right? But now you could have an AI do all of that enrichment and
Right.
makes your work faster. So long story short, burnout is eliminated, productivity is off the roof, and your high level of fidelity or confidence just gets better.
Right. But is burnout eliminated or is the tier one position entirely eliminated? Because it sounds like what you're saying is that some companies now are replacing their tier one analysts with AI. And does that mean that, these junior analysts, because junior analysts are always going to exist no matter what they're doing, like they got to start somewhere, right? Does that mean that they have to start more at tier two level activities and that will, be more like a tier four is going to be introduced and tier one is going to become tier one plus. So what do you think that's going to be like?
It's a very good question, and I think it's a question the industry is asking, and quite frankly, no one really knows,
Yeah.
but we can only speculate on what that actually does look like. I think from what you asked, you kind of asked the question from or. I actually think it's more of an and of like, okay, let's talk about burnout and let's talk about what the role actually does look like. Burnout, I think we could say in some level of certainty that yes, burnout will be cut down because guess what? Where does burnout come from? Well, you feel like you just have way too many things that you could actually keep up with in your job, right? And naturally, that just leads to burnout because you just naturally feel like you're never doing enough to get rid of everything. If you have AI that's cutting out about 50 to 40% of all of that, then you're focused on the high priority things. And so I do think the question of burnout will be quite solved. I think there's also things you hear in the industry around talent shortages, right? In the
Hmm.
SOC, right? And obviously I think a lot of this will solve for that and just more better confidence in the job. But when you cut down all of these results or when you get those outcomes that we just talked about, what does that lead to? Well, it leads to the question of like, what does your role actually look like if an AI is actually going to do all of this? And so I think that takes us now to your second question of like, what does that role actually look like? And I think it's a question everyone's asking in the industry right now, but the way I like to look at it, quite frankly, is I heard this really good analogy the other day, um, you think about the calculator, for example, when the calculator was invented, right? Like prior to the calculator, right? Our parents had to do math in their brains, right? Like when you actually think about all of the amazing architecture in Europe and all these places, like
Yeah.
these guys have to do math in their brains or find ways to calculate. And when we had the calculator, we felt as though, oh my gosh, we're no longer going to think anymore, right? We're never going to think because now we could just do it all in the calculator. But guess what? The nature of how we were had to think started to change, right? Because the basic stuff were eliminated and you had to much more critical thinking. And I think a somewhat similar analogy might play out within the SOC, actually. I feel like everyone's predicting, oh yeah, like the tier one role will be eliminated. I'm actually trying to take a different perspective that's maybe hyper different from the opinion that I actually think the tier one role will remain. However, we're going to spend a lot more time on education and training for a different level of what that role actually does look like. I actually don't think we're gonna morph things into tier two or tier three or something, or
Mm.
maybe just have one role. I think the nature of that role will change one because I don't think a lot of people are talking about this. On the other side of things, the attackers are getting better.
Mm-hmm.
AI, all this technology, we're only talking about it from
That's so
the
true.
defender side. Like I feel like all the conversations just on the defender side are like how LLMs are helping us better. And I'm actually doing a report on just security for AI and LLMs, right? Which is a very different topic from how security AI for security. It's a very, very different one. And we don't think enough about the attackers are getting better. Ransomware attacks are going to only get sophisticated over the next 10, 5 years, right? If we predict autonomous SOC is like the next 10 years, guess what? Like these guys, ransomware is getting easier to do,
Autonomous
right?
hacking.
It's
Fully automated hacking.
Tell me, just list them. You could just go through the list. So, long story short, I actually think so. Think about that, right? The role of the level one analyst changes, and a lot of that change will be evolved by the new types of attacks. I think we're gonna have
For
new types
sure.
of attacks that are gonna evolve, and we're gonna have to keep up. And so you're gonna, because that's why cybersecurity exists. The bad guys always lead us first, and
It's
then
the
we
tug
kind of
and
like
pull, this like cute little
follow.
dance we're doing. Just you step ahead and we'll step ahead with you.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
my hot take is the tier one role won't be replaced. I think
Yeah.
it's going to remain. However, we're going to spend a lot of time on training and learning
Yeah.
and into evolving that role.
I heard someone else say that they believe that because the AI, does the workflow for them, they can see it all happening. That's how they're getting trained. That's how they know what to do when they move up, right? It just helps them as a tool to learn as well. So I think that's really interesting too, because you can also, with
Absolutely.
these like large language models, you can query it, ask them questions about what is happening in your environment like and you're using natural language to query, and so it'll help junior people understand what kind of security practices are best practices and what to actually do. So I think that's interesting.
Abs-
Do you
Absolutely.
think tier one is going to be fully automated?
I do think what we define as tier one today will mostly, yeah, about 90% will be automated. Absolutely. I think when you think about report writing, case summaries, and those things, like those are things that eventually a machine should be able to do really well. Obviously, a lot of it comes down to training, also comes down to like regulations or like your reporting standards within your enterprise or company or sector or industry. I think it's also very specific, but yes. I think a lot of the enrichment work that we do in terms of context, in terms of enriching IP addresses or whatever you're doing, isolating endpoints and those things could be done by AI. And most importantly, I think filtering out false positives, because the more data an AI has, the better it should be, right? There's no
Right.
reason why we should be able to filter out false positives, very true positives. Absolutely. But then the higher roles, the more senior roles that involve more investigation work, I think those still remain.
Yeah, and that's why I'm like surprised and maybe even disappointed to hear that people are replacing analysts with AI because I assumed that, it was just going to make it easier for them and not fully replace, and that they would be able to then instead of, having 70% alert coverage, they have 100% alert coverage. But I guess that's not the case today.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I think
It
this is
depends
also
on what company it
it
is, the
really
industry,
depends. It really
everything.
depends,
Yeah.
right? There's some small group of companies, right?
Yeah.
We also heard the story of Klarna, right? I think is it Klarna that made headlines because I think they got rid of all their customer support staff just because they were able to actually automate a whole bunch of that process, and they saved a huge line on their bottom line, right?
Hmm.
To profits for the company. There are a number of other companies, actually, the case studies that have actually come out in terms of how customer service and customer support roles are
Yeah.
evolving because
But
of
like
this.
in the SOC though, I'm
Now,
like
now,
I
so
want
now
it to
bring,
be just
yes,
convert into 100% alert coverage instead of letting
yes.
people go,
But
you know?
if we bring this to the SOC, yes, no, 100 because if we now bring the same back to the SOC, I do think it's it's played out in two ways, right? On one hand, you might have companies that have just dedicated the whole, because by the way, just so you I'm very so your listeners know, and even in my report, I make it super clear, and in my post, I don't think this AI team will replace. I don't think it will significantly replace humans, right? I'm not in the camp of even, yes, I don't believe in a fully autonomous SOC, right? I still think we need humans in the loop. So I want to just put that and be
For
really
sure.
clear. However, the reality of the market is two sides, right? One part of it being if you already dedicated a lot of FTE budgets to filter out a whole bunch of low severity alerts or triage and prioritization work, you might say, hey, you know what? We're budgeting to have X number of FTEs. Now we're no longer going to have that number of FTE, right? So you're saving some budget and there's some money because guess what? It's doing a better job at this. And
Exactly.
especially when we start talking about agent capabilities, as agents become even much more sophisticated in terms of tasks completed, 100%, I do think it will reduce that number of FTE, not completely replace it. But then to the other half as well, I think the big story, and I think this is really where a big part of the market will play, is really just making analysts productive, right? Like just acting as a force multiplier when you think about that, right? Because if you thought, oh, with my two or three analysts today, this is how much work we have to do, you could even cover 10 times more, obviously, with AI
Yeah.
tools at your disposal, right? Think about what ChatGPT is doing in our personal lives. I think that's going to be the same thing as well in the SOC. So, long story short, yes, some companies might FTE purposes and might actually replace, not completely, because I don't think you're going to completely. And then on the other hand, a big chunk of the market, my prediction at least, is augmenting, making your analyst 10 times better.
Yeah. Ideally, yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast, Francis. If we want to find you and what you're working on online, where can we look?
Yeah, you can find me at the softwareanalystsubstack.com. That's where I publish softwareanalyst.substack.com. That's where I publish all my in-depth research reports. I cover multiple different markets in cybersecurity, data security, cloud security, identity, as well as security, all parts of the security operations stack.
Yeah, and
So
I'm going to put the link in the show notes for the augmented stock report that you did because everyone should read it. It's great. If you like this episode of the Let's Talk About It podcast, you can find the rest of our episodes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. And we will see you next time. Thanks so much.